All right, let's get on to the most controversial college basketball development of the weekend. Big in-state rivalry game between Tennessee and Memphis. Supposed to be played in Nashville. A little more than an hour before tip-off, the game was canceled because of COVID issues within the Memphis program. What we have subsequently found out is that two Memphis players, specifically Landers Nolly and Tyler Harris, both tested positive for COVID on Saturday morning. My understanding is that one of the two woke up on Saturday morning not feeling well. In this day and age in college basketball or any other team sport, if you're not feeling well, you are instructed to tell somebody quickly. He appropriately told the trainer. They immediately do a COVID test, comes back positive, and then they test the other one because those two, again, my understanding is, are roommates on the road. So for the sake of the conversation, let's say Tyler Harris tested positive, woke up feeling sick, told somebody they get a test positive. Well, we got to test his roommate now. That one comes back positive. They tested them 3 times each. Penny Hardaway said earlier today, every one of them came back positive. They didn't even have any sort of wiggle room here.
Can we go a 4th time just to make absolutely certain, please?
So at that point, contact tracing protocols kick in. And according to Penny Hardaway, after you take into account the players that Memphis is redshirting, the players at Memphis who are hurt and unable to play right now, and the unvaccinated players who were subject to contact tracing, Memphis only had 4 players available to play in the game. So Memphis had to withdraw from the game. And Penny did clarify, again on Sunday afternoon, that his vaccinated players were not subject to these same contact tracing protocols. In other words, Memphis has got a lot of unvaccinated players. And that is the only explanation for why Memphis could not field a team against Tennessee. I know you're a little removed from it, and congratulations on it, because down here it gets real in the weeds. But there were all these conspiracies about what Memphis had done and hadn't done, and a bunch of people talking when they don't know what they're talking about. And Memphis didn't want to play it. Memphis was ducking Tennessee. Turns out the truth is that Memphis has so many unvaccinated players that once the medical officials came in and started contact tracing, anybody who was unvaccinated is out. And after that number was identified,
could not put a starting 5 on the floor.
Couldn't put a starting 5 on the floor. Which, and I tweeted this earlier, and Penny is catching it as much hell from local media as I think he's ever caught. Because in the preseason, he did say, he was asked, just like every other coach is asked, and he said, around 90% of our guys are vaccinated.
Aaron Rodgers. This is college basketball's Aaron Rodgers situation. It is.
At best, he assumed incorrectly. At worst, he was flat lying. And he explained today, and this is the one that I just cannot get my head around. He said, when I said 90%, it was based on, we had all these guys, they were all talking about getting vaccinated. And then I guess they just never did. And I just really hadn't thought about it until today. What? You and I have both talked to a million coaches about this. Literally more than 100 for the Candid Coaches series. And there are some coaches who have 100% vaccination rates on their team. Other coaches who have struggled with it to some degree. I know one coach who's got a player. He's like, my player legitimately comes from an anti-vax family. You can call them crazy. I think they're crazy. But that is really who these people are, and they are not getting this vaccine. So you deal with that. Then you've got the religious exemptions. I know one coach who told me, I've got a Muslim player. He ain't getting this vaccine. There's nothing I can do about it. I can sit him down and educate him all I want to. At the end of the day, his religion's going to win out. There's nothing I can do. My point is this. Penny Hardaway is not the only coach in America who doesn't have his entire team vaccinated. But every coach I know knows who's vaccinated and who isn't. The idea that Penny would genuinely say today, I assumed they were getting vaccinated because they talked about they were, and then I just sort of let it go. I never really talked about it again. What? Because here's the truth. If this many Memphis players are actually unvaccinated, which we now know there is, Memphis was always one positive case from having to shut down.
Dude.
That makes it impossible to get through the season, especially now. And how about this? You ready for this? With this Omicron going around?
Exactly.
They've already had to cancel Tuesday night's game. They're going to come back in 7 days. You know what's going to happen? Boom, another positive, shut down again.
That's the takeaway from this, okay? Is that because all these players are not, this is, I know when we talk about real world issues here that impact the sport, sometimes people can't handle it, but we're going to have a grown-up conversation about this, okay? The seemingly great news, or at least the encouraging news coming out of South Africa, which was the epicenter for when we first discovered Omicron, is that, man, it really looks like this next variant here, it just doesn't seem to be posing the kind of threat for hospitalizations and deaths the way that Delta did and even wild type did. That is wonderful. I mean, this is something that gives us real hope going forward, right? But the other side of it is looking to be absurdly transmissible, okay? And this idea that people think that these teams can work their way around it. So it's like, stop testing the players. Again, I'll repeat what I said, and I'll bring this back to Memphis. I'll repeat what I said on the Friday podcast. These programs have not been testing their players because they've been vaccinated. The ones that haven't been vaccinated, yes, depending on where you go to school, you are subject, some of them literally, to 3 times a week testing, okay? But because Omicron is so transmissible, when you've got team doctors and people in the medical field, you know, the kind of people that go to school until they're 27, 28, 30 years old, and it's literally their livelihood that depend upon this, they're not going to be fudging with the numbers or trying to take advantage of a locker room situation by not testing. They literally will get fired and they're open to litigation against them. That's not going to happen. You're not living in the real world. You don't understand how these things work, okay? So for Memphis specifically, because it has such a high rate, and this is more than anyone I've heard from. I've talked to a couple coaches that are like, I got 7 or 8, and then the other half of my roster, I've heard a couple of those. I haven't heard as 4. So what Memphis is in danger of here is because Omicron specifically is so transmissible, the Tigers potentially could be looking at losing 30% of the schedule if this keeps happening, right? If they just can't get off the mat and they keep getting these tests, they're not going to be able to play them if they're asymptomatic. If you are unvaccinated, that's a different deal than what the NFL is trying to change right now and the NBA is looking into. You're vaccinated, you got your booster, you're asymptomatic, you should be able to play. I think a lot of us are getting to the point where that seems to make sense, okay? We are learning as we go, week by week, month by month with this, okay? If you are vaccinated and particularly boosted, which I think is another huge thing, because if the data and science is showing, if you get your booster shot, even with Omicron, you're that less likely to be symptomatic. If you are not symptomatic, you are not going to get tested. College basketball is going to have a very messy January here because a lot of these players haven't been boosted yet. Now this thing is ridiculously transmissible, and so they're a little more likely, even if they got their 2 shots as opposed to the booster, to show symptoms. When that happens, it triggers the team doctor. All these schools are going to go through this, and so this is something that the sport is not going to be able to avoid. A lot of coaches told me they're going to try and get their players vaccinated or boosted literally this weekend and into early next week when they don't have games around the break. But for Memphis, I don't know what happens here, man. I would love to be wrong. But if you're telling me you only have 4 players who have been fully vaccinated in the midst of surges that is showing nationwide data that is as high as almost as it was at the beginning of this damn thing, Parrish, it's a huge issue. I can't believe we're talking about Memphis again, but they're now at the epicenter. It's amazing to me. And Penny does deserve the criticism. And the idea that he didn't know the number is a joke. And it's also like he deserves to be called out for saying 90. That was just disingenuous at absolute best there. And it's phenomenal to me how Memphis, on a literal week by week, almost game by game basis, there's just one thing after the other with this program here. It's just crazy.